Hi, everyone, and welcome to session 2 of our Teacher and Leader Writing Professional Learning Series. My name is Sarah Solman, and I am the K-3 Literacy PD Specialist at the Louisiana Department of Education. And I am going to allow my co-presenter, Ms. Katasha Edwards, to introduce herself.
Good morning, everyone. I am Katasha Edwards. I am the Leader PD Specialist here in the Literacy Division at the department, and I'm excited to join this second session on writing and word recognition.
So just in case you would need to contact us, you are always welcome to reach out to us through our email at katasha.edwards@la.gov if you'd like to reach Ms. Edwards, or me, Sarah Stolman, at sarah.stolman@la.gov. If you have questions, if you need support developing this out for professional learning opportunities at your own school, definitely do not hesitate to reach out. We are here to support you. We can also kind of support you through Zoom or even schedule a site visit if that would help you at all in any way. But never hesitate to reach out to us. This is our job to help you, and we enjoy supporting our schools and our systems. Today's objective for this writing series is that by the end of this session, the participants will understand how the word recognition strands of Scarborough's reading rope inform high-quality writing instruction in grades K through 3. So let me just set a little context here. As we completed our series on the science of reading this past summer, some of the feedback that we got, or the questions that we got, surrounded writing. We had so many questions about what does writing look like in K3. And so that's where this series came. This series was born out of the questions that you guys had as a result of our Science of Reading series. And one of the big questions was, how does writing relate to reading? Well, writing is directly related to reading. And it's really directly related to the science of reading. And so that's kind of our focus with this whole series. And that's where we're going to go with this series. So today we're going to focus on that side of reading that deals with really the word recognition and supporting our students in their ability to encode words with automaticity. So we'll talk through that today. But our goal for today is that you're going to see how these word recognition strands inform high quality writing instruction in grades K through 3. Now, what is writing and how do we teach it? Well, writing is a very complex process. In the first session, we said, if teaching reading is rocket science, then teaching writing is even more complex than that. And writing for students is a very complex process that requires our students to manage many factors simultaneously. Word choice, they're thinking about the words that they want to communicate or use to communicate their point. How do they spell those words? How do they put those words together in a sentence so that they make sense? How do they connect what they're saying with all the background knowledge and background information that they have and that content knowledge that they have? How do they make those connections and communicate this in a meaningful way to readers? Now, at the K3 level, one of the biggest things that we kind of deal with or approach is the fact that really our students are not at the point of encoding with sufficient automaticity. It's not a problem. That's just where they're at in their writing process, in their process to become skilled writers. So our students at this point at the K3 level are really working to build their capacity to encode with automaticity. If they're spending all of their time thinking about how they're spelling the words, it becomes increasingly difficult for them to think about all of these other factors. How do they put words together to make meaningful sentences? How do they connect this learning to other learning that they have and to what they know about the world, right? So a big part of the work that we do in K3 is building their skill with encoding with automaticity. Now, that doesn't mean we don't think about all of these other things, but just like with the reading rope, at these earliest levels, these things are often taught very separately, right? On the one hand, we're teaching our students to kind of understand our language, understand how letters reflect sounds, and we put those sounds together to make words. But then on the other hand, we're really building their ability to think critically, develop ideas about texts, develop ideas about content that they're learning, and respond appropriately. Now, at this earliest level, you can support that second component of writing instruction through deep questioning, right? Building their ability to communicate orally. Because as they become more proficient in communicating orally, that will ultimately transfer to their writing once they're able to encode with automaticity, right? But we also want to build their capacity to think deeply about things such that when they get to a point of encoding with automaticity, they're going to have um, a really sophisticated sense of how to communicate content in a complex way. So it's important that we're developing both of these strands simultaneously in our writing instruction, just the way we do in our reading instruction at the K-3 level. Now, today we're going to focus on that word recognition side, that side that supports that ability to encode with automaticity. Because really, we want our students to be able to kind of have to do very little thinking when they're putting those words down to paper so that they can really focus more on the content. But it's a process to get them to encode with automaticity. So we're really gonna, we really need to do important, good work there. Now, as I was mentioning, research indicates a strong relationship between spelling and writing. Writers who have to think too hard about how to spell are using up valuable cognitive resources needed for those higher level aspects of composition. So even more than with reading, writing is this mental juggling act. And it requires students to be able to automatically deploy these basic skills: handwriting, spelling, grammar, punctuation. And when we say automatically, we're thinking, you're not putting too much thought into that. That's not consuming the cognitive load, right? What's consuming the cognitive load is the content, right, of what you want to put in your writing, not so much these like basics, these mechanical skills. Because we want our students to be able to keep track of such concerns as topic, organization, word choice, and the audience needs. Now, poor spellers, even at second and third grade, may only write what they feel comfortable spelling. And if you're a second or third grade teacher, you may know that, right? You may have noticed that in their writing. They may steer clear from really sharing what they know and the complexity of what they know in their writing because they can't spell it. And that's a really sad thing, right? If they're not able to communicate these basic ideas. And they may easily lose track of their thoughts as they focus on spelling those words with legible handwriting. The same goes for, handwriting, right? Like if, we sometimes kind of brush through that, but the students have to be able to form these letters quickly and without much thought, if they're going to be able to encode with automaticity. So the work that we do with handwriting is very important. And we're going to talk about handwriting a little bit later in this session, because not only is it important, but it's directly tied to reading fluency as well. So we'll get to that in a second. Now, as we mentioned, writing is directly tied to reading. So I thought it was important for us to kind of go back to this reading rope and look at how, at the earliest levels, these strands are very separated, right? So if we're thinking about like our entering kindergarten students, are they at a place where they're able to encode or decode with automaticity? No, not at all. At those levels, when it comes to word recognition, we're really developing their ability, their phonological awareness. We're developing their phonological awareness, their ability to decode, and ultimately leading to sight recognition of words. But that's not something that happens overnight. That happens through systematic, explicit phonological and phonics instruction, right? The support that we do. So on our first day of kindergarten, or our first few months of kindergarten, are we expecting our students to write essays? Certainly not. And that might just lead to really frustration. It doesn't mean you're not supporting the building blocks of writing, through your work with all of these different threads or strands of the reading rope, but you're not rushing to have your students write. And I think that's one of the big misconceptions we have about writing is that we need our kids to be writing. But if they don't have sufficient knowledge of the code, they're not necessarily prepared to put their ideas down on paper. So slow that down. Really, I want you through this series, especially, to think about how all of this work that you're doing, as reflected in this reading rope, is supporting your students' ability to be great writers. We're not rushing the process. We're not kind of ignoring everything that we're doing in phonics and moving into writing and expecting them to write these essays that they're not prepared to write, right? So spend that time on these word recognition strands, because that's going to support their ability to encode words with automaticity, right? And be aware of where they're at in that process, because that's going to give you the information that you need to know if you're ready to move into having students communicate their thoughts in writing. Now, in grades K-3, the focus of writing instruction, just like reading instruction, should be on two key areas. One, building students' capacity to encode with automaticity. And then two, building their capacity to develop and articulate complex thoughts about diverse topics that they can communicate through their writing once their encoding skills catch up. So if you think about the curriculum that you're using, on the one hand, you're developing their phonics skills through systematic explicit phonics instruction, and that's supporting that encoding piece, but you're also building knowledge, right? Through read alouds, through exposure to complex text. You're asking questions. You're encouraging your students to respond to questions in meaningful ways. And that is also supporting their writing. Both of these things, both of these streams of activity that you're doing with your students are supporting their writing, right? But we're not rushing to braid the rope with our youngest students. It's very much okay to keep these things separate at this point. Now, when it comes to building students' ability to encode with automaticity, we have to understand that that goes hand in hand with our systematic explicit phonics instruction. So this is not separate. You don't need a separate encoding time for your students, a separate writing block where you're teaching them to encode, right? This is going to happen through high quality, systematic explicit phonics instruction. As students become proficient in their knowledge and application of the code, they're going to be able to apply this knowledge to writing. Now, how do you do this? Well, you embed this work in your systematic explicit phonics instruction, right? So as you are learning different phoneme and grapheme correspondences, your students need to be given opportunities to begin by practicing writing words that have those spelling patterns in them, right? You might have little spelling tests that have the spelling patterns that you've introduced, so you can get a sense, can they write words that include those patterns, right? As they become more proficient with that, you can introduce short phrases, right, that have the multiple spelling patterns that you've introduced. And then short sentences that include these correspondences and whatever tricky words or heart words or that you might have introduced at this point. And remember, those are not just Dolch words, right? We're not just teaching kids lists and lists of sight words. We do teach our students some high leverage words that don't play by the rules of the code, at least where they're at in their knowledge of the code. And we do that very strategically, because that does support their reading and it does support their ability to write. But you're giving them opportunities to practice writing those short sentences. Now, if you're having your students read from their decodable readers, you can have them respond to questions in short sentences, right? Or short answer responses to those questions. And think about all of the information that you can gather from analyzing that work with your students, right? So if I have my students in reading a book about cats, say, then what I can do is I can analyze their responses to those questions to get a sense of how are they applying their knowledge of the code in their encoding work, right? If I know that I've taught students to use digraphs, or I've taught students digraphs, and I notice that in their writing, they're still not applying those digraphs, that's support. That's an area that I can support my students in, right? But it requires the careful analysis of the work that they're doing. I'm not teaching them writing separate from what I'm doing. I'm embedding my writing instruction in the work that we're doing in our systematic explicit phonics instruction, right? So I'm using all of those opportunities to analyze where they're at, see how they're applying their knowledge of the code, and using that to support their movement towards encoding with automaticity. I'm not doing something separate. This work is embedded in the work that I'm doing every single day, right? Now, as you introduce these sound spellings, it is so important that you're giving them the opportunity to practice writing those sound spellings, right? So it's not like, oh, today we're going to be learning about the digraph CH, right? And then just kind of move on, or only have them do that work as they read through their decodable readers. You also want to give them opportunities to practice writing that. And that's important in so many ways, right? It supports their ability to encode with automaticity. But one of our science of reading researchers, Stanislav Stahane, shows that this process of forming letters, right, even more than just typing them or identifying them by pointing, this process of forming letters through writing activates these neural circuits in the brain that promote automatic recognition while reading. So not only are you supporting encoding with automaticity, you're also reinforcing decoding with automaticity, because as students write, it's almost like it imprints on the brain and they're able to recognize it much more rapidly when they see it in text. So writing letters ultimately improves reading fluency. So when you're doing your systematic explicit phonics instruction, you can't leave a lesson without giving them the opportunity to practice writing those sound spellings, right? And then applying them in short words or in short phrases or sentences, right? So you want to think about how you incorporate all of these different things into your lesson so that it's not this singular lesson. And this doesn't have to be complex, right? I may do a chaining activity where I include our short vowel sounds. And then at the end of the lesson, have them practice writing those short vowel sounds and then identifying words with, or writing words with those short vowel sounds too. Maybe matching pictures to words and then writing those. And that's really going to support their ability to encode with automaticity. And it gives you a daily sense of where your students are at in their encoding process. So it's very important to do this work. And this work really is mutually reinforcing. So definitely keep that in mind as you're developing lessons or as you're implementing lessons from your curriculum. It might help you understand how your curriculum and why your curriculum is designed the way that it is. Now, just to reiterate, phonics instruction is incomplete if it does not provide opportunities for students to practice writing the sounds and use the knowledge of those sounds to form words. It has to be a part of your lesson. If it's not, your students just aren't going to have that complete package. They might be able to decode, right? But they're not going to be able to encode, which is not going to be able to support their ability to communicate their ideas in writing. Now, at the earliest grade levels in kindergarten, right, first grade, they don't have sufficient code knowledge to communicate their ideas meaningfully in writing. You cannot expect it, you cannot, teach a systematic explicit phonics lesson on, the very first letter sounds that you're going to introduce, and then move to a writing block and expect a student to write an opinion piece, right? That's counterproductive. It's going to lead to frustration. If you're a kindergarten teacher, you've probably been in the boat where you've seen, they said, okay, guys, today we're going to share our opinions about what is our favorite food. And then they go back and they just write things that aren't even letters, right? Like just like kind of squiggly lines and circles and who knows what else, right? That's not going to really support them. right? What's going to really support them is giving them the opportunity to practice encoding words with these sounds through your systematic explicit and phonics instruction. Now, that's not the only thing we're going to do to support their writing. And tomorrow we're going to talk about how building their language comprehension also supports their writing. Not tomorrow, in our next session, we're going to talk about how the language comprehension side is an equally important part in developing their ability as writers. But for our youngest learners, our number one goal when it comes to encoding is building their capacity to encode with automaticity. Don't start placing demands on them that they're not ready to do or that they're not ready to meet, right? Now, when they are communicating their ideas, however, inventive spelling is encouraged. Students should use their knowledge of spelling patterns to communicate their ideas. So our earliest writers may not be able to write words perfectly correctly from the get-go. But if they're using their knowledge that they're using what they have been taught and applying what they have been taught and spelling inventively, that's okay. That's completely fine and encouraged. Now, when they're using that, one of the questions that I would often get is, well, what do you do when it's spelled wrong? Well, you don't want to say, oh, this is spelled correctly, right? But the feedback that you give students should affirm their application of sounds, but it may also acknowledge the incorrect spelling. So something that I might have said to one of my students was, wow, you used your knowledge of sounds to spell this word just like you heard it. Great job. But I'm going to let you know that the correct spelling for this word or for this word is blank. You didn't know that yet, and that's okay. That's okay. But what you did is exactly what I wanted you to do. You used what you know to spell this word, right? So it's acknowledging that maybe they haven't learned all of the aspects of the code that they need to spell it correctly, but they did exactly what you needed to do, them to do. They applied their knowledge of the code to spell the word as they heard it. So that's a perfectly acceptable thing for them to do. And it's really kind of wonderful to watch that kind of progression. Now, how do you know if your students are applying their knowledge of sounds and writing? So different things that you can do, spelling tests are great, right? Have students spell words that include the sound spellings that you've taught. Dictation exercises, maybe you read them a sentence and you have them write that sentence and you see how they're applying that. But really, it doesn't have to be more complex than just an analysis of the writing patterns that you see them use in response to short prompts or exit tickets or free writing activities, right? So if I'm looking at their work and I had the students do some work where they're applying their sound knowledge, and I noticed that this child is just never, when it comes to j, they're always spelling it with a g, right? I'm going to look at that, and that's such a quick and easy way to support your student, right? You can go and say, okay, I notice right here, you're always using the g when you should be using j or something like that, right? You analyze those things. Everything that students produce is an opportunity to analyze and assess. And if you get into that mindset that you're going to use that, it makes your job as a teacher so much easier and so much more efficient. And as they're completing that work around the classroom, you just kind of walk around, you make your notes, you provide that on the spot support, and it really doesn't have to be more complex than that. Now, just a few little notes to keep in mind. Don't rush the process of writing. Do not rush students to write essays independently when their knowledge and ability to apply the code is not sufficiently developed, right? There's no benefit to saying, okay, everybody close your reading books and now we're moving over to writing. And today we're going to write, and I want you to write an opinion piece on this, right? And I know that a lot of us do that, right? But that's not supporting your students' ability to write, right? In a way that's wasted time because they're not at a point yet where they can do that. And that's not really pushing them in the direction of writing that we want them to go. We don't want them just telling us that their favorite animal is an elephant, right? We want them responding to text or thinking critically about text and communicating ideas about text through their writing, or communicating their ideas about the knowledge that they've gained through their writing. That kind of work is unproductive, and it's not going to it's going to create frustration for the students, and it's not going to lead to encoding with automaticity. Now, students need daily opportunities to practice applying their code knowledge in writing using tasks that do not require the cognitive demands that more traditional essay writing requires. So this is where, I was talking about the writing words or short phrases or even sentences in response to text. But it's not just go sit at your desk and write your journal for 20 minutes, write your journal for 20 minutes, right? It might be, we read this story on cats in our decodable reader, and you have a question from that story that the students have sufficient code knowledge to respond to, right? And they're going to respond in a sentence or two about that. Short answer responses like that are embedded in the context of reading instruction are a great bridge to essay writing, right? I'm not going to start my kindergartners there, right? Because really they're probably not even reading decodable readers this early in the year. As they do, I might introduce that and provide support. But this work is really a great bridge to essay writing for students. And what I would be looking at as a teacher is, are they communicating clearly in a sentence? Are they constructing a sentence that makes sense, right? And then I'm going to provide them with support with that. If they're just doing the 2-word response, that's not in a sentence. Nope, we're going to go back and fix that, right? Because their ability to craft a meaningful sentence is going to go a long way when we start applying that to essay writing. And tomorrow we're going to talk a lot about the doing work at the level of the sentence. If you're familiar with the writing revolution, you might have heard of this. I keep saying tomorrow. In our next session, we're going to talk about that work. But these short answer responses are a great way to support their ability to craft a meaningful sentence. And you have to set that expectation with your students and encourage them to apply the code that they have learned in these sentences, right? And if you give them 10 minutes to complete that, and your student can only write one word, they're not encoding with automaticity, right? So you might have to back it down where maybe they're only doing the words or the short phrases at this point, or you're giving them a sentence frame or something like that where they can fill in the words that make sense, that they can encode with automaticity. But again, our job is to support them in encoding with automaticity, and this work does that. Don't spend your time moving them to the essay when they're not there yet, right? And most of our kindergarten and beginning of the year first grade students are not quite there yet. So we don't need to rush that. The work that we're doing in the context of our systematic explicit phonics instruction and in our knowledge building side of our reading instruction is supporting their capacity to become great writers. Don't rush the process. Now, as they do become increasingly automatic in their ability to write words, so around middle to end of first grade and second and third grade, you can begin teaching them the process to draft essays, right? Using this plan, organize, write, revise, and edit model. And we want to spend the majority of our time in that planning portion, right? And that organizing portion and thinking through that. And we'll talk about that in these later sessions of this series. But again, for our earliest writers, don't rush that process. This work that you do to build their capacity to encode in the context of the work that you're doing, teaching reading, is very important work, right? So don't rush it. Now, I am going to turn it over now to Ms. Edwards, our leader specialist, and she's going to talk about how leaders can support this work.
Thanks, Sarah. You shared a lot of really great information about the importance of supporting writing at the word recognition strands. So as a leader, here are some things that we should do. We should definitely create those school-wide systems that support a shared reading and writing vision and shared writing strategies. Our schedules should include time to explicitly teach writing embedded in the content of the curriculum. And like Sarah shared, we should not have schedules that have our reading block, and then we shut down our reading block, and then we open up the writing block. We should teach our students that writing is a product of what they're reading. So when we're in our PLCs, we want to always make sure that our writing is a product of what students are reading, and not just in our reading classrooms. We want to make sure that we're doing that across all content areas, that we're doing that in social studies, science, and even math, that we're having those shared practices and shared strategies. To hit back on what we really talked about today, we want to ensure that explicit phonics and foundations instructions are a part of our literacy block or our writing instruction. We want to make sure that, as a leader, we understand that it's okay if our kinders, our first graders, don't come with writing journals that are filled with pages and pages of writing, because that's not where they are at yet. But as they increase their ability to encode, that in second and third grade, we will see their ability to kind of braid those strands together. So as leaders, it's okay for us to understand that. And in our PLCs, for us to dialogue and discuss that it's okay. And we want to make sure that there is time embedded for students to practice those foundations and phonics skills that are taught daily. And even as you go into, as Sarah talked about, when our students are doing those short responses to reading, even in second and third grade, we want to make sure that as we continue to build that code for them, that they're practicing those skills in their writing too. And those would be great opportunities for mini lessons. We want to make sure that we develop school-wide and system-wide strategies for writing instruction. And like Sarah alluded to, in our next session, we're going to talk a lot about the language comprehension strands, but that sentence level work is where our students will begin. So as leaders, we want to make sure that we have those school-wide strategies for that sentence level work, so that students aren't learning a new process for writing as they go throughout the grades, but they continue the same process. And lastly, we just want to create and cultivate a writing culture that views writing as an avenue to support and improve student reading and writing across all content areas.
Okay, so that concludes this session. We will have a session next week, and that session will focus on the other side, right? That language comprehension side, and how work in that area also supports students' ability to be great writers. But if you have questions or suggestions, really don't hesitate to contact us. It's one of our favorite things to do, is to support our teachers, to support our leaders, our district leaders. And we're here if you need us. We look forward to seeing you guys, and hopefully you find this session very helpful as you begin a new year of learning. Hope you guys are all doing well, and thank you for joining us.